Sephiroth on the tree of life, right? So technically, like, thing that a lot of people don't realize is that the Golden Dawn, even though it's a succession of grades, is divided into degrees. The outer order comprising the Neophyte, Zelator, Theoricus, Practicus, and Philosophus. 4 of those are on the tree of life. You technically, when you become a Neophyte, you have not stepped foot onto the tree of life. You're not in an elemental grade, as we call them, in the outer order. And when you do that, you step onto the tree of life. When you take your Zelator, your 1 equals 10, right? You're taking your first step on the 10th Sephirah, right? So it's your first grade, but it's the 10th Sephirah. And then you go on your second step, go up to Yesod, the 9th Sephirah. 2 equals 9. Your third step, 3 equals 8 in Hod, the 8th Sephirah. Your fourth step will equal, right. So you see where I'm going with this. 4 equals 7. So that's how that tracks, basically. But just as an extra piece, those first four elemental grades plus the probationary grade of Neophyte comprise the first degree of the Golden Dawn system. And then from there, you have a portal degree, which is, again, a probationary degree where you're in between Sephiroth. You're not technically on the tree anywhere. You're basically placed between certain paths on the tree, but you're not in a Sephirah. That portal degree, that portal grade is the second degree. And then when you enter into the inner order in Tiphereth, right? 5, your 5th step is the, the 5th step is the 6th Sephirah. 5 equals 6. Then you're in the third degree of the Golden Dawn. And then the rest of that is, I want to say there are no higher degrees, right? Kind of like Masonry. The third degree is the highest degree, but could also be above my pay grade.
All right. Enochian tables. They look cool. I'm assuming maybe this has something to do with John Dee, maybe his Enochian language that was channeled, but I have no idea what they're used for, what they're about, anything like that. So just curiosity of mine. Maybe you can lend a little bit of insight into that.
Yeah. The Golden Dawn system is Enochian. That's it. People don't realize that, but the capstone of the I would say the vivifying power and the ultimate magic being performed, the physical vehicle that the Golden Dawn is to deliver Enochian. Enochian is it's the capstone of the Golden Dawn system. And that's why when you're in the elemental grades, there has to be, you haven't opened a Golden Dawn temple in any of the elements if there isn't an Enochian, the appropriate Enochian tablet. So let's go back. The Enochian tables they're also called the Watchtowers or banners of the East, West, North, and South. They were delivered to John Dee in his scrying sessions with Edward Kelley, the medium, also the alchemist, also the huckster, but apparently a very gifted medium, enough so to convince, after repeated experiments, testing the veracity of these visions, he convinced Queen Elizabeth's court astrologer, John Dee, that he was the man for this experiment. So essentially what gets delivered to them in a series of scrying It's going to take way too long for me to branch off. And if you don't know what scrying is, just look it up. We'll definitely go into it in depth in another episode. But the series of scrying operations where D recorded and sort of made sense of what Edward Kelley was receiving. So Edward Kelley was the medium. You see this a lot. Take, for instance, Edward or Frederick Hockley, the 18th century, and I believe early 19th century scryer. He's known for being like one of the earliest scryers of the modern period. He didn't scry. He never scried because he couldn't. You need somebody sensitive in order to receive these things. And so he used typically young girls who were his like house servants. Again, we're talking about cups, receptivity, femininity, intuition, visionary, astral experiences. The more one gets in touch with the feminine side of themselves, and there's a grade for that in the Golden Dawn. And I've done it. It's some of my favorite work because I'm very much in touch with my feminine side. Look at the beautiful living quarters that I make for myself.
Yes,
I make soap. I make music. I'm extremely creative. I am, not to pat myself on the back. For a man, I'm gifted in intuition and divination and astral stuff, because of honing in on that feminine element. But I have it balanced. It's not one over the other, really. It's just each one, right? The masculine side projects itself. The outward face is the pharaoh. The underlying, behind the scenes, why I'm doing all this stuff, why I'm out here. That's the feminine counterpart, that silent inner knowing that, well, you have to, and when this gets exhausted from constantly having to be out here and taking shots from people and talking my face off, listening to countless podcasts where I regret at least a half hour of everyone that I listen to. I'm completely fucking mortified. I go back to that feminine, and the feminine tells me, like, lick your wounds, pats me on the back, says, now gently go back out because this is not about you. So, essentially, Hockley had to use somebody, feminine, young, that was able to download these things, I guess we would call it in modern vernacular. Now, D did the same thing through Kelley, and he tested those visions. And what he got was an Enochian, he got a language, an angelic language. They never call it Enochian. In the histories, it's said that this language was delivered to the Hebrew patriarch Enoch by the great angel Ave, but they call it the angelical language. And it's got its own syntax, its own grammar. It's a fully fleshed out thing. Now, some of the best works on the historical side, one of my favorite books of all time on this stuff was actually John Dee and the Empire of Angels by Jason Louv. And if you really want to dig deep into the Enochian, you can look at Frater Yakida's Enochian magic in theory and Enochian magic in practice. And of course, what is essential for the Enochian library is the work of Aaron Leach, who is also a frater in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And we've done some stuff together. His stuff is really indispensable. Great work because he has the erudition, they're scholarly, they're well put together, but he has the insight of a practitioner of decades, which he is. So if you want to learn more about the history and the syntax, and you're really interested in that stuff, those are the works to check out for me. But what we derive for the Golden Dawn is that a series of elemental, so there's a whole system of magic that comes with these angelical communications, and all of that stuff is fleshed out. You could also get John Dee's 5 books of mystery. Those are essentially his journals of the experience. He was journaling all this stuff, and it's, illustrations of the tables and all that stuff. And the big things that came out of it were the Sigillum Dei Aemet, sigillum Dei Aemet, or Emet. So that means sigillum is the seal, Dei is of God, and Emet or Aemet is truth. So the sigil of, or the seal of the truth of God, or the seal of God's truth. That's the big thing that comes out of that. And then the Enochian or the angelical watchtowers, the terrestrial tablets that are in the quarters. And it's primarily, we in the Golden Dawn, we use the terrestrial tablets, which are it's the same thing. They're the watchtowers, and they are comprised of a square with many lesser squares filling it out. And it has the angelical language and many, many names of angels, intelligences, and names for God written on these things that you have to work and you have to memorize and you have to learn how to, especially now in ZAM. This is a lot of the work that I've been doing, is learning the formulas that are specific to the Golden Dawn to a degree, but a lot of it did come from the Dee and Kelley stuff, or was inspired by it. But there are many ways to work these tablets, many ways to read the names, many ways to vibrate the names and to perform that kind of scrying magic.
Can you utter a cool Enochian phrase?
O el sona feva orgazi, o goho iada balata alexarpe he komananu tabitotem. That's about it. It sounds a little silly. It's cool. It's a little silly, but there are rules of pronunciation that you have to follow. It kind of sounds like pig Latin.
It does sound like Latin a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. But the terrestrial tower tablets and the watchtowers, they're put in the four quarters, and they're essentially elemental tablets. And what happens is the elements and the elementals are drawn in to a temple space specifically through this focal point, through this lens of this Enochian tablet. So if we're working the elemental grade of Earth, we need to do an advancement into Zelator, or an advancement into Theoricus from Zelator. We got to have the Earth tablet there.
What is an advancement?
So you're only initiated as a neophyte. You're then advanced. Actually, technically, you're initiated as a neophyte, and then you're also initiated as a Zelator. And then the rest of them are advancements, which means you're moving forward, you're moving on. But there's a different connotation to the word initiation than there is to advancement. So each grade is not an initiation. Most of the grades are advancements. Then you are initiated into the inner order in the 5-6. That's also an initiation. But then the rest of the stuff are advancements. That's what we call them. So, you as you go through the elemental grades, more tablets are open for you. You're introduced to them in turn. The first thing that you see, they're not present in the neophyte hall. They're there, but they're veiled. They're covered. You can't see them. And then you go into your Zelator grade, and then you're introduced to the Earth tablet, and so on and so forth. It's because we're calling in these energies specifically through that filter, through that lens, through that focal point. And all of the Golden Dawn correspondences, all of the whatever you want to call them, God forms, the great names, words of power, all of them have some place on that Enochian tablet, and each one of them have multiple in each square. They share space. It's this beautiful. I don't want to call it a filing cabinet because that makes it sound too mundane and boring. This is a fucking switchboard for the universe, which is absolutely incredible, and not just astrally, theoretically, like it's like a multi-dimensional switchboard. But the thing is about Enochian, it's not the angel magic of love and light. It's the angel magic of everything, which means this stuff can be psychologically damaging. And it's actually that is the reason Paul Foster Case, an initiate of the Alpha and Omega, which was the Mathers's temple, their order of the Golden Dawn after the split. He was initiated into that, and he had correspondence with, it was either that or he was with the Stella Matutina. I can't remember, but he was initiated into one of the splinter orders of the first Golden Dawn schism, and he corresponded with Israel Regardie, and he says to Regardie in his private letters, which I've read, you can read them, they're online, that Enochian magic has made like somebody that he knows go completely insane, one of his friends, and this is not something it's not rare enough to not have perked your ear up. It's definitely something you hear about working with these energies and working with the angels and this kind of stuff. It has a tendency towards dissolution if you start at it too early. But on the other hand, many magicians and adepts swear by it. That and Jason Louv put it the best. Enochian magic is a form of magic that anytime you work it, you change in some way. Something about you changes. And it is powerful and it's potent. But at the same time, can you handle that energy? Well, if you just answered the question with yeah, I think I can, then you're not fucking ready. Because I'll tell you, I mean, this stuff is shoved down the line in the Golden Dawn career. It's your last, or second to last test. And when I say test in the adept grades of the Golden Dawn, I'm talking about you have 7 exams or 8 exams from Neophyte Adeptus Minor to Theoricus Adeptus Minor. So in two of those subgrades, you have 7 exams, and each one of those exams has a written test, a practical, maybe 2 or 3 practical tests, and 5 or 6 reports. So you're constantly doing this work, and this stuff is reserved for the end of ZAM, which normally ZAM alone is supposed to take you a minimum of 5 years to get through.
Wow.
The outer order, the quickest you should be going through the outer order of the Golden Dawn, if you're doing it correctly, is 3 years. That's the quickest. 3 years in the outer, however long you need in NAM, and you need to spend 9 months in the portal, right? It's that gestation period. You're supposed to go back into the womb, that probationary state, before you enter the inner order. So 3 years in the outer order, 9 months in the portal, and then you're in NAM for however long you need to be there to get all your stuff done, all your tools made, and all that stuff, which is arduous. And then you're in ZAM for a minimum of 5 years. That would be breezing through it. And then they give you Enochian. So don't think that you can just go and start doing this shit. Or try it, have fun, and write me. But there's another thing in the Enochian stuff that are called the aethyrs. And these are, you do the scrying of the aethyrs. They involve these calls and their visionary experiences. And these are very cool. Crowley did these. I think that's how one of the ways in which he kind of channeled certain things for, I think it was the Book of the Law. But there's a whole lot in we could do a 2-part episode on Enochian. It's so fascinating and so voluminous. And so there's 2 quick anecdotes I want to tell about the workings with these angels. They don't care. It's not, like I said, it's not the magic of love and light. It's not this fluffy new age interpretation. These entities are perplexing and often horrifying, and universally. Some people enjoy working with them. Other people go mad. But you typically find this kind of eschatological through line. And what is eschatology? Eschatology is the study of the end of the world. And from a particular standpoint, microcosmically, that's very apropos specifically for the work that's being done in the 5 equals 6. The end of your world should come. But they do some pretty strange things. And obviously, you know, if you're a little bit of a skeptic, you're going to scratch your head and be like, was it angels or was it something else? Because at a certain point, the angels that Dee and Kelley are in touch with, they tell them to swap wives. And they do it, and they like record this weird experience of them swapping wives at the behest of these angels. And then on the other hand, you've also got, you know, the whore of Babylon from Revelation appearing to Kelley. And several times in the operation, Kelley said, we should stop. I don't think that we've contacted something that's like good. I think we're in touch with dark forces. And then D goes on to say, okay, well, let's test them again. He tests them by the, you know, by certain means involving Christ and things like that. And then there's another time when I think Raphael, the archangel Raphael, comes to D and or Kelley and tells him, like in the middle of the night, like, you've been delivered this information incorrectly. Here's the rectified table. Here's the right way to do this. And so then from that point, it's like the rectified Raphaelan, Enochian, angelical tables and stuff like that. And so it's fraught with all these weird inconsistencies and these, you know, hairpin turns. We're going here now, and just it's one of the most fascinating things I think I've ever. And I love history. This is one of the most fascinating, tiny little things that I think has ever occurred in the history of, at least in the West.
Yeah. So has it sort of, as it has been passed down through these lineages as time has gone on, with more and more people working with Enochian, has there been probably like a lot of refinement and testing and conclusions that could be drawn that people are pretty safe saying, like, you know, that these are some methods and ways to go about these things. These are common results. Is it kind of been pretty fleshed out? Is there still a lot of up in the air stuff with it, or?
Well, the great thing is that people who even if you're a highly ambitious, pain in the ass beginner and you're like, fuck this guy, I'm going to go and do it, likely you will get to the stuff and having no discipline, having not had to undergo rote memorization that is tantamount to a PhD in Western magic. You're going to look at the stuff and you're going to see the mountain of information, and you're not going to know your asshole from your elbow. You will not know what to do with this material. So thankfully, most of the people working and commenting and writing on this stuff are very high level adepts. They're very practiced, typically, from all traditions, you know. I mean that inclusive of the Crowleyan stuff, right? Lon Milo Duquette, even though he's kind of in the Crowley camp. If I hate having to divide it like that, I don't really think it's divided. But if we're talking about those orders, the OTO, Thelema, etc., you know, he knows what he's doing when it comes to Enochian magic. He's very, very practiced. Nobody can deny that he knows what he's doing. And he's done work on that too. I think his thing was called Enochian Vision Magic, was the name of his book. And they actually worked off of some of the stuff that Mark Stavish ended up putting together, the theory and practice of Enochian magic, in the IHS monograph series. He was, when Lon was doing his experimentation, Mark was giving him certain materials, and so a lot of high level people. Mark, Frater Yekida, who is just, his stuff is the highest level stuff I think that's out there in terms of a working Golden Dawn adept magician. Him, Aaron Leach, you know. So there's a lot of people in the field contributing, and there is, there's this whole thing where it's like, okay, the Golden Dawn went off in these different directions, and Mathers and Westcott kind of created this switchboard, universal switchboard, like I was saying before. It wasn't necessarily the case with Dee and Kelley. That's not what it really was. They didn't really know what it was. They just wanted to keep in touch with these angels that were always kind of dangling this carrot on a string in front of them. Go here, go there, do this, swap wives, go to Habsburg or wherever the hell they were going. And so you've got some practitioners like Aaron Leach who have done a tremendous amount of work to, rectify Enochian magic as Dee and Kelley might have been practicing it or had delineated it, Sloan manuscript and stuff like that. Whereas you've got somebody like working in the Golden Dawn tradition, and if you really wanted to learn Enochian magic, at least the beginnings of it, like the entry level stuff, like the hi, I'm new here, you could just go to the last chapter in the Black Book in Regardy's Golden Dawn, any edition, and it's there. There are lots of things that you won't be, there is definitely an oral component to this stuff. I mean, people don't know that, but you should assume that, because all spiritual lineages have some sort of oral component. And if you don't receive those, then you're doing, cookbook magic. And that's a little, magic is less like cooking and more like baking, right? You've got to be scientific and precise about it. And that oral commentary will help you refine and tell you, what am I supposed to be seeing? What am I not supposed to be seeing? I mean, it's generally accepted that if you're at this level where you're working the Enochian squares, on the tablets, if you don't know what you're supposed to be seeing, there's an issue. You shouldn't be here yet. So because you will have studied all those correspondences for, probably at least a decade at that point. So and you will have had to pass tests. I mean, there's stuff in the Golden Dawn in the ZAM curriculum particularly. If you can't scry, you're not going to pass that test. If you can't objectively come out of vision and tell your examiner, he gives you a symbol that you haven't seen before, and he knows what that symbol means. You don't. And you have to scry into that symbol and come out and tell him what that symbol means, or her. And if you can't do that, you don't pass. So this is the level of work and achievement that has to be shown before you go to Enochian. So I mean, there's a lot of communication between higher level adepts, but again, a lot of this stuff you're going to be talking about, like, okay, let's say in a Golden Dawn perspective, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, I'm going to be primarily discussing these things with one person, my administrating teacher, the adept in whose charge I am, in terms of he needs to grade my work and all that stuff. Now all my work goes to the chiefs of the order, right? He says, okay, he passed, but they have to okay my attestation, and then I need a dispensation to go to the next grade or what have you. So those are the only people who I'm really going to be talking about a lot of those experiences with. But obviously we all talk, just magicians, just in general, I'll talk to whoever. I don't mind telling, Mark or Jamie or JMG or anybody what I'm experiencing, because I know that, I can trust those people and they're having similar experiences. So, there's definitely, I guess the short way to answer your question, if I understand it correctly, is that, like, by the time you get to work the Enochian squares and tablets and all that stuff, you know what to expect. And if it's off, that something's wrong. So I'm not necessarily looking at anyone else to tell me, like, was I supposed to experience that? Because these things, at least in the Golden Dawn system, are finely honed, finely honed. You know, there's really not a lot up to interpretation at that point.
Yeah. The more you talk about it, the more I have respect for the Golden Dawn system. All right, so I got about a half an hour, so I don't know how you are on time, but maybe we can get into a little bit of Agrippa and see how far we go. All right, so who is this Agrippa guy everyone seems to be talking about? Maybe give me a little bit of background on him as a figure, a little context into maybe of a biography, and then we can get into a little bit of my questions.
Sure. So he was a Renaissance physician, soldier, polymath, theologian, scholar. I guess all this stuff comes under the fold of polymath. But most importantly for our purposes, he was an occult author. And he was the first occult author to attempt a systemization or a scientific sort of rehabilitation of what at the time was considered this superstitious, right, pharmakia type of practice, right? He rescued it from German folk tradition, even though it had been very nicely nestled there, right? It was transmitted through centuries and developed, and was safely lodged in this time and place as a folk tradition. And then at that time, right, 1500s, you just had, I mean, I can't imagine what it must have been like to been alive at that time and working, and because you had all of Plato and the Corpus Hermeticum, all that stuff was lost to Europe. They had so there was one Platonic dialogue in Europe through the Middle Ages, and that was the Timaeus that had been translated into the lingua franca of the time that was available for study. Marsilio Ficino, I think in between 1460 and 1480, translates and publishes, maybe 1440 and 1480, I can't remember. But in that block of time, those like 30, 40 years, he translates and publishes the entire works of Plato, the entire extant works of Aristotle, the works of Plotinus, Porphyry, Proclus, Iamblichus, and the entire Corpus Hermeticum. So now all that shit's just here. And then you have Cornelius Agrippa, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa von Nettesheim. You have him culling all this stuff, looking at it, looking into it. And not only that, but you had Paracelsus too, who was local. He was, it was German, like in that same time and place. And Paracelsus, the great alchemist and Spagiric, the founder of Spagyria, he gave us the philosophical essential of salt, that third philosophical essential. So all this stuff that is modern magic as we understand it happened right before Cornelius Agrippa, or right as Cornelius Agrippa was incarnating, and as a young man came under the tutelage of essentially a bishop. He was an abbot, so he was in charge of a monastery, and his name was Ioannis Trithemius. I call him Trithemius. So this man was essentially, the head of a monastery, and he was well respected enough, obviously, to have attained that position, but he had a little, he was a little iffy. Having to do with clerical authority and the general, I guess, rules of engagement of the clergy at that time, the Catholic Church, right? Which was don't read magic, don't do magic, for the most part. You have people like Thomas Aquinas, right, who had written, and his teacher, Frater Albertus, or Albertus Magnus, really. You had them taking these principles and bringing them into a Christian, a Catholic kind of fold, a worldview, which wasn't artificial. it's not artificial because these things start in Platonism. Christianity was founded in the blood of Platonism. That is the blood that runs through Christianity's vein, is Platonism, is Platonic. So they, in bringing these things back and bringing Neoplatonism back into Christianity, and all that stuff, they were really, it was just another Salve et Coagula experience. Taking apart and they're just bringing it back together. And Cornelius Agrippa had the benefit of studying under Trithemius, who collected the illegal books, the illicit books. He went around and I think it was Sponheim was the place where his abbey was, at least for a time, and he would start these libraries, these occult libraries, and he would, he was on the low, right? There were whispers through the community about him practicing magic. Eventually, I think he was stripped of his position or he had to move, but Cornelius Agrippa stayed with him. And I think he was young. He might have been like in his late teens. And he had so many conversations with him about magic and about where it comes from. So now he's got the German folk tradition and he's sitting with an educated abbot who has these books that had disappeared for centuries, recently been retranslated. This man, in the light of Catholic theology and what he understands about Neoplatonism and Hermeticism, is now telling this young man, this is how the universe works. This is what magic is. Let's talk about it. And it was from those series or the initial conversations that Agrippa was inspired at this young age to begin writing the 3 books of occult philosophy. And he sent Trithemius drafts, and Trithemius told him, keep going, keep pushing your work. Ultimately, the manuscript of the 3 books was stolen or fell into the wrong hands, was passed around Europe. And it was Cornelius Agrippa had received word that this was going to be published by other persons. And at which point he said, well, I'd better just get it out. I wanted to revise it. I wanted to do X, Y, and Z. It doesn't look like I'm going to get the chance to do that. Let me just edit it one more time as fast as I can and get it out there before these people do and steal my work.
Damn, that's badass. So you could say that he had a grip on things, being at the time that he was. Okay. So I kind of browsed through just, a little bit of the contents of some of Agrippa's stuff, and some things stood out to me that I thought would be fun to talk about. One in particular was elemental qualities and mixations as applicable to the soul. It's obviously very interesting for me because it's sort of got alchemical connotations with the elemental things and whatnot. And, I would assume you got like the air element, which is going to be associated with the intellect, kind of like we were talking about earlier, the earth with the physical, and so on and so forth, but kind of like interested in maybe some examples of these mixings or I don't know if that's what that means, the mixtions.
Mixtions, yeah, it just means mixture. But so here's what's kind of important about the Agrippan system, and not only that, but plays into the work of Dee and Kelley, who again this was all right around the same time. As far as history goes. But there are 4 elements, right? And there's a 5th element. So everything we talked about, it's really funny because we tend to get into these discussions now that highlight a specific sort of thing, a theme, a general motif. And we don't do this on purpose because typically we don't really communicate very much about what we're going to talk. I will have some vague idea. We're going to talk about Agrippa, Golden Dawn stuff. But I don't really know what we're going to talk about, but it always ends up having this really interesting kind of synchronicity that we keep circling back to. We started out talking about the element, the implements, elemental implements. Then we talked about the elemental tablets, and now we're talking about the elemental mixtions. But what has been unsaid is the quintessence, the 5th element, spirit. And in the Golden Dawn system, there is an implement for that. In the Enochian system, in the Golden Dawn and otherwise, There's a tablet for that. You have the 4 terrestrial tablets of the quarters, and then you have the tablet of union, which sits on your altar in the midst, in the center of all of them. And you're not to work these tablets without the tablet of union, because the tablet of union unites and binds them under the auspices of spirit. And in the Golden Dawn, we have a saying, it's invoke the highest first. So we never, ever open anything elementally without first invoking spirit, because spirit has to govern these things. It would be like letting a bunch of toddlers loose in a candy store with nobody to watch them, bringing in elementals without spirit there first. So, and what does that look like? It looks like things going on fire. If you're talking about, a fire grade, in terms of water, there could be high emotions. Somebody could start crying, not really know why. In air, people have literally gotten dizzy and had to like sit down and almost pass out, things like that. So, earth, a great example would be like, nobody having the energy to do it, like it's just feeling heavy, feeling weighed down, depressed. Things like this can all, it could even, it could even be like literal, like a pipe bursting in the water grate or something like that. So you need to really, and all these things are things that have happened. You really have to invoke spirit first so that the elemental energies do not get out of control. And one of the things that Agrippa says is that everything has a spirit, everything has quintessence. And one of the things that have more of that quintessence will have more of whatever virtues are inherently in them. So the more spirit that thing can contain, usually evidenced or predicated on its consonance physically, its physical manifestation of, its perfect physical manifestation of one or several particular virtues. In the case of like red jasper, associated with the planet Mars and the element of fire. If that thing's shaped like a flame and bright red, and maybe you found it in a really hot, dry place, that thing has a lot of spirit, because it's very much like it's really showing forth its virtues, the fire and the martial virtues. If it's dark red, looks like blood, that's martial, that's Martian, so that would be said to have more spirit. And that's true in people. The quality of our character and the way that the virtues are embodied in us will influence our appearance and influence the way that we speak and move and things like that. And but the one thing that's really interesting to me is that Agrippa talks about the most useful application is when a practitioner or a magician, or whatever word he uses in Latin, is able to extract the spirit, the quintessence, and project it. So there's that. To me, that's very, very interesting, because that is essentially what the alchemical outer order of the Golden Dawn is doing. It's extracting spirit from the 4 elements, and then in that solve phase, and then going back in the coagula, putting everything together again, right? Synthesizing everything under the auspices, under the governance and guidance of spirit, of the quintessence. So that to me is really interesting. I just wanted to touch on that in there, and there's a little bit of Agrippa thrown in there as well. And that's obviously the entire significance behind the pentagram, which is such a huge feature, both aesthetic and otherwise, in the occult and magic. It's literally that. It's the 4 elements when the pentagram is upright under the governance of spirit. This is man, right? This is what we're supposed to be. No other animal can do that. You invert it, which is what dark occultists like to do, and you're invoking the opposite. You're subjecting spirit to the impulses of the 4 elements, which are the material.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that inversion, so I'm glad you touched on that. And then with the things that you mentioned, does this have anything to do with the infusion of the occult virtues? Because I saw that as a, in the table of contents, one of the subjects was infusion of occult virtues. And I was wondering, in regards to these, is that something that you had mentioned, or is there a lot more to it than that?
Well, so, and I think this also touched on something that I talked about before, starting right when we started talking about the wand, starting from like the most available materia, which is something physical. So when Agrippa's talking about mixtions and when he's talking about infusions, he's talking about you have essentially three different kinds of permutations in terms of substances. You have substances that are pure, so they're very, very strong, pure, and he calls them unmixed. Very, very strong. It's one virtue or another. Then you have mixed or compound. And those are things that are mixed, right, but can be purified. And then you have something called, I think he calls it like middle spirit, but it's essentially a variety of different virtues that cannot be simplified. They cannot be purified. And there are a couple of different operations that Agrippa talks about in terms of magic, and specifically herbal preparations. He does speak at length about herbal preparations, and infusions take place more with the plant materia, that kind of work. So what he's doing is he's talking about creating an environment where you can infuse something with a particular virtue based on liquids that you can suspend this thing in, and this preparation with this herb with that other herb, and those kind of mixtions that he's talking about in that sense are essentially, he calls it he says, and I'm going to paraphrase it here, but I was writing about it last night and I don't want to screw it up. But he says you can imbue things with the virtue of many stars. And those are, that's kind of like this infusion and this mixtion. So I'm taking something, let's say, that is very, very strong for one particular element, one particular virtue. And I want to combine that with something else. I wanted to combine fire and earth or something like that, because depending on which system you're using, which Agrippa lays out in the opening chapters of the first book, there's different ways you can get the elements to work together. There's one way of looking at them where like there's actives and passives, and like the primary active and primary passive can't, they have a volatile mixture, which is to say fire and water. And then he delineates a Platonic way of looking at them, which is it's reversed. Those two are harmonious. So he's talking about these finding the virtues in things on the earth. And it's crazy because now it starts to all unravel. You need a lot of theory behind this. That's why there were 3 books. I think there's 74 or 73 chapters in the first book. But essentially you can find the nature of that thing based on its appearance, on its taste, its smell, its scent. You use the 5 senses to figure out what virtues. And Agrippa says this is not easy. It's not like, oh yeah, just go ahead and do it. He's like, this is incredibly difficult. The greatest minds of all time worked together over centuries trying to figure out, trying to correspond these things and notate it and preserve these notes. But essentially you use your 5 senses to figure out what objects and substances contain what virtues. To what degree are they mixed? Are they pure? Are they, that middle nature where it's like there's no way to purify this? And once you have delineated that, you can begin to work with them, and you work with them based on your theoretical knowledge of the way that the elements will or should permutate with each other. Will they be friendly? Will they be antagonistic to each other? And you can do things like create herbal preparations and that can heal people or can bring love potions and things like that. But ultimately, what we talk about there is in, and he doesn't call it this, but it's been called this before, and I want to delineate it very clearly. That kind of magic is called demiurgy. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
As opposed, some people call it low magic, some people call it field magic, some people call it natural magic. But that's what the first book of occult philosophy is about. It's about natural magic. It's about demiurgy. You start changing things in physical existence with by way of the four elements, right? You've got the demiurge who, under one system of correspondences, is tantamount to the ineffable name, the tetragrammaton Yod He Vav He, as fire, water, air, earth, respectively to each of those letters. That's what you're working with in demiurgy. You're working with the elements. But when you get to theurgy, which is the point of the three books, now you're incorporating the fire of spirit, which is in Shin. It descends in between the elemental demiurgic name and rends away upward, away from having to gratify my material desires by changing my material circumstances. And now I'm more focused on spirit and what Agrippa would say, being perfected in the divine mind. And so Agrippa, in the course of his three books, really, he's reconstructing theurgy, and he's trying to rehabilitate magic from demiurgy. But he essentially says, which is witchcraft, what he essentially says, you have to start with demiurgy. Yeah. Because the analogy that I kind of created that he kind of hints at is that that's where we are. We're in Malkuth of Asaya. We're in the physical universe. So we are, if you look at it, like some people would call this like the ladder of virtues, you have to ascend. I prefer to look at it in terms of a musical scale, and what's happening there is that the physical material is the root note. If you understand music, is the root note of a specific key, whether that's fire or whether that's martial or whether that's Jupiterian or whether that's whatever it is. There's three registers: the terrestrial, the celestial, and the super celestial or divine. You pick a key, planetary correspondence. I want to work theurgy in the key of Saturn. So what do? You go and find maybe an elm switch, right? Because elm is correspondent to Saturn. Or some black tourmaline or something like that, some sort of stone or crystal, and you work from there. You find the root note, you use this, you find the synthemata, which he calls sigillum, signatures. Each thing has the signature of a particular celestial influence, and behind that a virtue that is imparted by way of the celestial rays. And then you just play that key. You play it up and you play it down. And that is to say, you climb that ladder of the virtues beyond just the material, even beyond the celestial. And once you're able to travel beyond the celestial to the divine mind, you there remain continually perfected. You're made perfect there.
Yeah. Yeah, it totally reminds me. I actually recently just got sent a couple spagyrics from a friend of mine, Danielle Coutrie in Australia. Her thing is called Yantra Medicina, and one of the ones that she had sent me, it contains colloidal gold. It's got honey infused with it, all pertaining to that particular octave, if you will, having those associations of like that sovereign preservation sort of correspondences, and just inculcating that particular virtue. And she goes so far as to even like cymatically sound bathe them in specific corresponding frequencies. Of course, astrologically auspicious timing, like you said, the planetary correspondences and all that. So yeah, that's a perfect example that kind of corresponds to exactly what you're speaking about, I think. And so there was a couple other contents that kind of stood out to me as well. And I don't know, some of them we might have time to get into. One, okay, let's touch on inclinations of enmities. This word enmities, I'm not familiar with that. Maybe you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, so it's basically like I forget exactly what context he's talking about enmity in, but enmity is basically like disagreement or dislike. So there's certain points in the first book where Agrippa talks about, substances and elements that are inharmonious, that if worked together become volatile. So it's basically, and what you also have to remember, I said it like it's like this huge thing. Yeah, there's like 73 or 74 chapters, but some of the chapters are like a paragraph or two paragraphs. So it's really funny with Agrippa too, because you'll look at, like, I have the book open here, but just because I've been working on it for this class. But there's like chapter headings that are so enticing, I forget, like, especially in the beginning, how the planets are distributed among the provinces and kingdoms, or things like just say, like, hypothetically, how adepts attract occult virtues, and by what means are they extracted from certain materia. And like, you race to this chapter and you open it up and it's like this. If you were to just look at the contents, it's like the secrets of the universe are in here. And then you open it up to the chapter and it's a fucking paragraph and he basically doesn't say anything. So it can be like so disappointing to read these books, because I mean, half of it's kind of like this proto science, and then another part of it is like folklore about, like, I don't know if just certain crazy things, just as a joke, completely being facetious, but like crazy stuff, like, if you're having trouble sleeping, rub a snail with your thumb, with your right thumb, rub a snail until you fall asleep. It's like, so there is a little bit of that in there. But an interesting thing to point out about Agrippa is that he says in the intro, basically, I'm paraphrasing, there's going to be a lot of ostentatious and crazy sounding shit in here. If you're not into it, ignore it. I have ignored it, but nonetheless, I have also recorded it. So while these things are silly, and this is what he says verbatim, do not ignore their causes. And so what he's talking about is that even though a lot of this stuff is pointless naval contemplation and this silly kind of ritualistic folk shit, the underlying theory is supremely important because it's telling us how the universe works. Whether you believe certain things or not, it's the underlying theory that you should be paying attention to. And having gone through all this stuff and, studying this stuff for as long as I have, he's not wrong.
Definitely. One of the major ones that I wanted to touch on was going to be light and color in magic, but I think this one we should probably save for like another episode, because that's probably a big one, and I think that you probably have a lot to speak on in that regard. So I guess, yeah, are there any, just due to timing, are there any just interesting aspects in regards to Agrippa and this massive tome that you want to speak to, kind of in closing out? Any closing thoughts?
I don't, because I feel like I already gave away too much. Because because there's like, there is a lot more, particularly in like the celestial magic and the super celestial or divine magic. The main thing, if you want to study Agrippa, there's a few things you have to understand. And the central tenets of making heads or tails of the Agrippan work is understanding the magical worldview. He does not lay it out. He does very little to actually tell you what these, and some of that is him saying, he says it also, like, I've not written this for people who aren't wise. The wise will be able to read this book and come away knowing, understanding, doing magic. But the unwise will walk away from this, none the wiser. So that's something that he explicitly stated about this work. And so the underlying tenets of the magical worldview that are fully delineated in Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophy. He relied heavily on Proclus. He references Plato and Pythagoras constantly throughout the work, constantly. He quotes Platonic and Pythagorean axioms. So what are they two known for? Plato obviously known for the mystical Platonic dialogues that expound the magical worldview. In the Timaeus, you have the microcosm and the macrocosm, which is, that is Hermetism, as above, so below. In Pythagoras, you have number mysticism, which is of supreme importance to the three books of occult philosophy. If you cannot understand mathematical realism, you will not understand Agrippa. But what's more important is you will never be able to understand magic. And that's about all I think I'll say.
Beautiful. Excellent teaser. Why don't you go ahead and tell people, if they are listening to this, maybe if they have time, since you are doing an extended course in regards to Agrippa, where they can check that out, and then follow that up with, of course, your channel and all of that.
Yeah. So when is this going out, by the way?
I'm going to try to put this out ideally before Thursday. Probably I'm going to try Thursday.
This week?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So Monday, August 21st at 8 p.m. Eastern is the first class of a 6-week course that will be taking place at the same time every Monday for 6 weeks on the three books of occult philosophy. Each book will be given two-hour sessions and a different teacher. I'll be teaching the first book on natural magic. Jamie Paul Lamb will be teaching the second book on celestial magic. And Mark Stavish will be teaching the third book on super celestial or divine magic. There are links to the IHS, the Institute of Hermetic Studies. There are links to this course where you can sign up, you can register or learn a little bit more about it on my Facebook and my webpage, which is ikebaker.com. And all my links are there. Just look around a little bit. And you will also be able to, you'll be given supplemental materials if you register for the class. You'll have lifetime access to the recordings of the class because they're going to be on these Zoom and Teachable platforms. It's not in person. You can do this from the comfort of your office or your living room or even in your bed. And you'll have lifetime access to those recordings. And I'm also giving out a free ebook called Cornelius Agrippa and the Magical Worldview, which will be available to all registrants of that class. Again, you can check that out on my webpage, ikebaker.com. And that also has all my socials. If you're having trouble finding that, either message us here on the Patreon or just send a message to my Instagram or Facebook page. I'm pretty quick. And that's really it. This is going to be an amazing class. I mean, like if I just Jamie and Mark alone, like if
he's got a super team going.
I know it's crazy. And the thing is, like, I'm so looking forward because we've not really communicated on what we're going to teach. We had a preliminary meeting on like, okay, 6 hours is 6 years is not enough for these three books. So six hours is not enough to cover the entirety. So what do we focus on? But we haven't really corresponded at all on like, approach. So each teacher is going to have their own individual approach. And I am like thrilled to see what Jamie and Mark come up with. This is like a once in a lifetime type of class right here.
Yeah.
How about you, man? What you got?
Well, first, I'll include those links in the description below for people that are watching this in the Patreon. That way you just jump on over there if you're interested. And for myself, check it out, Philosophical Minds podcast as usual. And yes, thank you again all for supporting me and Ike here on the Etherica podcast.
And thank you, Sky, again.
Thank you.